I'm Allison LaForgia, the managing editor of the content studio at HousingWire, and today our topic is surprise. First-time homebuyers are on the rise. Here's how to earn their business. Today's webinar is hosted by Maxwell. A few housekeeping items before we turn things over and get started in today's content. This is an interactive webinar, so please drop any questions that y'all might have in the Q&A by using the Q&A icon or by using the chat on the bottom of your screen. You will see a few things mentioned in today's webinar. We'll be dropping the link to the report that we will be discussing, and we will be sharing today's deck as well as the recording early next week. So with that, today we are joined by Ratul Dave, Maxwell co-founder and CTO. We are also joined by Alan Paris, the managing director of private label origination at Maxwell, and Evan Einhorn. He is the president and founder of Modern Home Lending. Now, Ratul, can you give us a little introduction into the report that we're talking about today and how this information was collected?
Absolutely. Thanks, Alison. I'm excited to dig in. I do feel like I need to bring the same energy as the title of this webinar, which starts with the word surprise. So I'll try to do my best there. But essentially, every quarter at Maxwell, we release our quarterly lending report, and that's based on the insights that are derived from our data infrastructure. I strongly believe that insights are only good as good as the data that it comes from. We are able to pull this data and the insights that we derive from that from seeing over 340 billion in loan volume. That includes over 73 billion in origination volume that we saw in our systems in 2023. We looked at data from borrowers for over 230,000 borrowers. So essentially, there's a lot of vast amount of data that we are able to do the analysis from. It is across lenders that are in our platform or ecosystem that range from independent mortgage banks, credit unions, community banks. So essentially, we are able to derive that breadth from it. And it's also sort of that infrastructure that powers our business intelligence product, which we use to provide insights to our customers around sales, operations, finance, and the market comparisons and other sets of data. So I think the biggest thing is the headline from what we are seeing in Q1, which is certainly around first-time home buyers, right? They've been, we see that they've made strides in Q1 despite the high interest rates and the low inventory environment. It's an increasingly important segment for lenders that we see use our technology and our products. And just as we saw, they now nearly make up for a third of the market. And specifically in March, we saw the highest share in our data from first-time home buyers. So really interesting trends we're seeing there, and looking forward to the conversation with Ellen and Evan around what are some of those insights there.
With that, let's move into the first question. So how are these buyers achieving home ownership?
Yeah, I can take that one. So, I think, ultimately, when you think about this segment, they've got a lot of support or life situations that help them be able to achieve home ownership either easier than purchasing a new home for another set of the market. So you got to think about this group. They're likely, ultimately maybe a lower price overall of the home that they're purchasing compared to the median. So they maybe have more flexibility of what's required. Maybe they don't have a family yet, so there's less needing of multiple bedrooms. They can maybe be a little bit less picky about certain elements of the home. So, even though home prices are elevated, this is probably one of the cheaper segments of homes that are is out there. So, potentially they're more flexible to look outside of the core metropolitan area or look in different states where home ownership is cheaper. Additionally, you can think about the rates as well. This group, even though rates are elevated, are receiving the lowest rates that are probably out there. So between FHA, between state programs, they're receiving a lower average rate than others. So even though elevated to what it was, even compared to 2020, 2021, this is the most appetizing kind of group in terms of where rates are today. And then the final piece is just ultimately less cash out of pocket for them. So the opportunity cost of being able to put only 3 to 10% down for a home rather than 20% if you're transferring from one home to the other that creates it a lot more appetizing on smaller amount, cheaper rate, and ultimately less cash out of pocket. That really kind of makes this segment be able to take up a larger percentage of overall originations than maybe it would, 2-3 years back.
So let's dig into who this group actually is. Who are today's first-time homebuyers? Ratul, can you provide some insight there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really insightful to sort of dig in the data. So almost like behind the headline, what is the profile, what makes up this group? And some of the things we're seeing is, in this trend from first-time home buyers, we're seeing trends around them being unmarried, female, and younger compared to sort of the broader segment of home buyers. So first-time home buyers tend to be unmarried, female, and younger. We also see in this group, which in that millennial age range, is they're sort of challenging the traditional norms on how they do homeownership. So they're buying on their own or with friends, or using sort of other means of how they are able to afford the home. Over half of them in the data we see, about 57% were unmarried. Goes back to sort of that profile compared to sort of 43% in the general market of homeowners. And then the average age of 37. So actually, when I saw this data around those trends, it actually reminded me of my own experience buying my first home. I'm not in that group anymore, but when I was back in that group in 2017, it was an anomaly that I was a home buyer here, purchasing a home on my own. I was unmarried. I was doing it on my own, and for me, it all came down to being able to be creative in what it would take for me to afford that home. So I looked at a lower down payment. I followed the old adage of, date the mortgage rate and marry the house. Definitely was approached it from that perspective. And then I think the other thing I remember doing was being very well prepared. So everything from making sure that I understand, I know what I need to be looking for, how do I shop around for rates and other things, was all of the research I did. So I definitely, looking at this data, reminded me of exactly my own experience. And when I was doing it, it was definitely an anomaly. It was not, I didn't know the data then, but everybody I spoke to was surprised by what I was doing. And I think in general, as I see this, it's showing the reason behind it tending to be more of that evolving attitude around the generational attitude around marriage, and still being considering homeownership as the cornerstone of the American dream. So you sort of see that all rolled into those statistics. The other sort of interesting thing about who they are is tending to be younger. So between the ages of 25 and 34, so under 35, ended up making up about 46% of these home buyers versus 28% of the home buyers in the overall segment. And then we've been seeing the rise of female home buyers since the mid 2023s, and in this group, they're almost 40% were female versus 37% of all home buyers. The other thing interesting we noticed was the average monthly income in sort of that 6,500 range, which was significantly lower than what the market average is for income. And I think it also goes back to tying, being creative with that co-ownership model with friends, family, when you're doing it on your own. So those are some of those trends that I see reflected in these numbers.
Why might there be a rise in first-time home buyers right now in this market?
Yeah, well, Ratul, what kind of what you were saying, like overall with all the stats, I think first-time home buyers, just because affordability has gone down over the last few years, like overall first-time home buyers are scrappier, more educated, coming in, like, planning. I've had a lot of people over the years that, we're waiting for the market to crash or whatnot, and they're just kind of tired of renting and they're jumping into it. So on an anecdotal basis, when I talk to someone that currently lives in a home and is possibly thinking about moving because maybe they want to move to a different neighborhood or bigger home, versus when I talk to a first-time home buyer, they're comparing different alternatives. The first-time home buyer is comparing, a new home versus renting, and the current homeowner is comparing, do I leave my low interest rate and maybe move down the street to a home that we want, but then maybe your payment doubles, even though you're not going up, twice the price point. So, kind of the first one on the slide, like the lock-in effect is huge on current homeowners. Millennials, Gen Z, just every first-time home buyer, they're kind of used to the higher rates. Like it's kind of a norm. They've heard it in the news. Like there's always a shock. Like when rates go up a half or 1% in a couple of months, everyone's like, but on the flip side, when rates drop 0.5%, people kind of get off that fence. So we've seen a lot of that, and it's a completely different conversation. And it's a higher pull-through ratio, I know, at our company when we talk to a first-time home buyer versus having a past client come back to us and run numbers on a new potential property. Now, there's creative ways with temporary buy downs and all that kind of stuff. We can kind of transition that, but just the first-time home buyer has a completely different alternative. And, while no one wants to say, hey, for sure you can refinance, they know at some point, it could be later this year, it could be 3 years from now, that payment will likely be dropping. So, and then, I know I have some friends that were paying like $2,000 for a studio in Scottsdale early COVID, and now it's well over $3,000. So yeah, all those little things definitely add up.
Yeah, I think a key piece to this is ultimately they represent a larger share because of the lock-in effect. We're making second or not first-time home buyers a smaller portion of the market. So that's right. One element to it. So the denominator is getting smaller, but then there's, as Evan pointed out, a lot of things that are making that total amount, you need a unique amount of first-time home buyers growing, regardless of what share they represent of the total market. And those are the things where I think a big piece is that getting the new normal of what rates are. I think like it's unbelievable how quickly the human mind can adjust to what the new normal is and forget what history is. And so I think understanding that this isn't going to go back to sub 3% anytime soon, you still have to solve your own goals and your own desires for home ownership, especially when you compare them to how expensive rent is getting overall. And so I think those elements are key in just getting to a view of this is what the market is. How do I go make the numbers work for me to go become a homeowner that many people are just leaning into right now?
And it's definitely a different conversation. Like the piece that you said about, are we ever going to go back to those rates? 2 years ago when rates started going up, most of my client conversations were, hey, when do you think rates will go back to the 2s or 3s?
That's right.
And it's like, well, we don't know if they'll ever be there. Now I have clients telling us, hey, we know it's not going to go back to the 2s and 3s, but like people always want to know, when do you think they'll go down? Which, yeah, again, if I had a crystal ball, I probably wouldn't be on this webinar, no offense, but that's the conversation we have with clients. There's definitely a twist over the last couple of years that it has become normalized.
I think on that rate, more to add is it might be also sort of that human nature to believe that we are at the end of a current down cycle. So if you see, in the report, what we see is trends in the average interest rate from the loans we are seeing on our platform, and up until Q4 2023, it was rising, and then in Q1 we started to see it average down to 7%, and so that's sort of also psychologically that feels like a sense of like, hey, we've ended a down cycle or a rising interest rate cycle. And so now is the time I'm adjusted to what that new normal is. And now is my time to step in and eventually in the future, maybe look for a refinance. But most of those first time home buyers do have that feeling of like, hey, we are past the rising interest rate cycle and we should be now setting to this new normal.
So we just spoke about rates and people adjusting to where rates are and the new normal of rates and being away from that 3%. Something else that's affecting sentiment out right now, I think for home buyers sort of unilaterally, but especially first-time home buyers, is how do we think this NAR ruling is going to impact first-time home buyers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a clear shift, especially, for kind of quick context to summarize the new NAR ruling for anyone that hasn't heard is, what typically, let's say, average agent commission is somewhere between 6%, split between the selling agent and the buying agent. That typically was almost always paid by the seller of the home. And so now that shifts where it's going to be more equal, and potentially 3% on the new home buyer and 3% on the selling agent. And so what that provides is now a new cost, or not provides, but what that causes is a new potential cost for first-time home buyers. Someone who already owns a home doesn't feel that as much because they're making some savings from selling their home. So that's a little bit more equal of a transition, but it's a brand new cost that isn't in the system today for first-time home buyers. And so I think this is a super interesting, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because it's playing a little bit with supply and demand and extra cost and also some benefits in the market that it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But the key element that I think that would have the biggest impact of first-time home buyers is ultimately if there starts to become a little bit more critique in negotiating on what you're paying an agent for, and maybe potentially componentizing the elements of what an agent does. And what I mean by that is, an agent today does a lot of work in the transaction. They help get you in the home to actually physically see it. They work on contract, etc. And so if you can say, hey, I actually don't need to get you to get me help in to get in the home, but rather I just need help in the contract piece. Like that's the piece that I'm really confused by. What does that charge? And then ultimately, how does that change how prospective first-time home buyers get into the market and who they go see first if the agent isn't having as big of a role in the transaction? And so I think that's the biggest trickle effect for the mortgage industry is, does the demand of where first-time home buyers need to start the process start a little bit more in mortgage rather than the agent being the kind of key of all demand and splitting the referrals into their mortgage partners?
And part of the NAR agreement is that buyers have to sign a buyer broker agreement before they go look, which I know anyone, when you sign a contract, that just feels, scary, especially for a first-time home buyer. So, buyers should always start and get pre-approved first, just so they know where they're at. But I definitely think this will gear more towards that. And then, I do worry a little about down the road that if the market, if rates drop and the market does become a little more competitive than it is now, that you will see people offering less commissions, and it will unfortunately impact, those first-time home buyers more, just like it was a couple of years ago. Like we saw that first-time home buyer share smaller just because they couldn't compete as much. But I mean, time will tell.
Yeah, and I think, ultimately though, it is likely a headwind for this group in the kind of short midterm, until there kind of is this evening of the field of who's responsible, where is the lead coming from, what is a fair share in negotiation of the work that's going to be done, which will all get ironed out through kind of a fair market. It is a new cost in the system. And I think if I were potentially a first-time home buyer, I would definitely try to get this in before that becomes the norm, because you are going to be ultimately cheaper getting into the home in the next few months before it becomes the standard of having to pay effectively potentially the equivalent of 3% to get into a home. So it is hard to ignore that this won't cause some more friction in that process, but ultimately I think it'll more just shake things up in how things are done rather than keep this group on the sidelines. I would say, because I think that's the trend that kind of came through all this data is the scrappiness of this group. They look at alternative ways of how they do it. They look at down payment assistance programs. They look at creative, like you buy it with your friend or significant other before you're not married. So it's creative elements of how they're getting to home ownership. So I think that will stay true to this group. And so even if there's this new element in the transaction, there's going to find ways of how you still get into their home.
And now that we've addressed that, let's dig into lender success here, because I think that's why the majority of our audience is with us today. So why is this segment valuable to lender success? Evan, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think, in the tech world, or just in business, a lot of people say LTV, lifetime value. In the mortgage world, that's loan to value. But I think, loan officers that plan on being in this business for a while, or even the next 10 years, the first-time home buyer offers way more of a lifetime value than some other clients might, because they might buy their first home now. They might refinance 1 or 2 times over the next few years. Who knows where rates will be? And then they might have to upsize in 5 years and then upsize in 10 years, or they might buy a second home or something else, versus some other clients who, I know there's plenty of clients that we helped in 2020 and 2021 and 22 probably buy their forever home, that they've downsized, that's their retirement home, and there's just less transactions. So as far as long-term value and where you're going to spend your time, money, and effort, there's definitely a huge benefit long-term that it's kind of, a gift that keeps on giving, that if you help that first-time home buyer with their first home, you do a great job. Hey, you know what? You're helping them with the refinance. You're helping them. Maybe they weren't married before, now maybe they're getting married. So you're helping them once they get married, buy that next home. So I think it's definitely, more long-term success. And then again, internally, I know we have higher close ratios, kind of like the lock-in effect that we were just talking about, that when you're talking to non-first-time home buyers, not saying people aren't moving. If you talk to people that are working with a relocation company, they have to move, so that's going to be a very high ratio. But if you're talking to people that are just considering moving, that already have a home, it's, I don't want to say time is better spent on first-time home buyers, but there's a higher pull-through ratio, and they definitely should not be ignored. And even if there's more education needed from the lender to the borrower, it'll pay dividends, because from what we've seen, higher close ratio, and then more of a lifetime value long term.
Yeah, I think there's probably argument also of that group, as they're getting into purchasing their first home, and through you as the lender, has a ton of potential for increased direct referrals into their networks who are likely in a similar stage. And so, what gets me excited for lenders, I think, is what Evan said the most, which is this, recurring, refi and next home purchase, et cetera. So you can really extract that lifetime value of the customer, but then also this kind of like just ripple effect of, hey, Sally got a home from you and she loved the experience. You were incredibly consultative and educational as she went through the process. So she's going to refer Joe, her best friend, who's just started a family and they need a home as well. But you might not see that ripple effect as much in other groups as this group, because the life, where they're in their life stage, is so relevant, and they're all kind of entering these key moments in their life that could lead to just increased benefits outside of the kind of one customer that comes in.
True. Very true.
And for our next question, how can lenders connect with first-time homebuyers in today's market? But before we jump into this question, I do want to launch a poll. So to our audience, what strategies have you found most successful in attracting first-time homebuyers?
I'm answering this too.
Well, don't answer yet. Let's see
the I won't say I'm going to answer it through Zoom, just not. It's going to be a private. It's like I'm at the poll.
Interesting. It seems like there's a lot of interest in providing support and education on the home buying and mortgage process.
It actually didn't let me vote, but I do have my answer.
We'll still make sure Evan gets his star for his successful answer.
For his participation.
I voted.
All right. I'm going to show these results really quickly. So, Evan, what do you think about the results?
I was going to go with the first one too, providing support and education, which, the first, honestly, they all go together, so they're all important. Because, having the loan products and programs that cater to first-time home buyers, if you don't have those, it's a little tougher to offer support and education because you don't necessarily know about all of them. And I'll kind of dive into that in a bit, of knowing, even if you don't have the loan programs, like what else is out there. And then on the same side, there's technology that we use to help support number 1 and 2 of, offering the education and then kind of meeting people where they're at.
With that, Evan, let's jump into the actual question. How can lenders connect with first-time home buyers in today's market?
So I think number 1 is becoming the expert. So 1, learning all the programs that your lender has. 2, programs that you guys might broker out. And then 3, there are other programs, we're headquartered in Arizona. The state of Arizona just came out with a new program. Unfortunately, there's only a few lenders that they're working with statewide. So out of the hundreds of lenders, but it's still important for us to know what that program is because it's in the media, it's in the press, so that we can have those intelligent conversations. And I have referred a few people, to these state lenders. And those clients appreciate it. And realistically, there's only a few hundred buyers that they're going to be able to help. So they may be coming back to us, in a couple months. But really knowing first-time home buyer programs creatively, I think you saw on the chart before, like first-time home buyers are getting lower rates. So knowing about, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac LLPA waivers, knowing what your median income limit is in your area. All those little things that can be good talking points, down payment assistance. And the biggest thing that I think first-time home buyers want is meeting people where they're at. Ratul, maybe a little later, I'll let you share, but like we use Maxwell. I'm going to tout Maxwell, but yeah, like even though I would say I'm one of the younger loan officers, or at least I used to be, like I would say about half of our applications do have some phone application involvement. So we always offer clients, hey, would you like to fill out our online application? Do you want to do it on the phone? And then sometimes there's a combination of both. And, also meeting people where they're at, where, are you texting them? Are you emailing them? Are you calling them? Because there's some clients that literally won't answer a phone call, but you text them and they'll respond immediately. So meeting them where they're at either. And then as far as actually like connecting with them, educating clients, and then also educating agent partners, financial advisors, kind of like Alan was talking about, like you get one first-time home buyer, they have other people in their life are probably going through the same process. So that could be offering a housewarming party for that first-time home buyer because they're probably going to invite other people that are renting. That could be doing events near apartment complexes. Like there's different, Fannie Mae programs that are specific areas. So holding open houses or events in those areas. So there's a lot of little ways that you can kind of get on the ground, but at the end of the day, I think meeting people where they're at. One other thing, just quick side note, is we also make that friction, like the barrier to entry, easy. Just like I was talking about, the buyer broker agreement might be scary to sign. A lot of people think a hard credit check is scary, and the good news is a lot of first-time home buyers are educated, that they're like, don't run your credit because it's going to hurt you. So that's the good news. We always say, hey, we're happy to go through a mini application. We're happy to do a soft credit check first, just to see what makes sense. So that way you can build that trust. Because there's not a lot of people that are willing to give you your social date of birth and then within 15 minutes, all of a sudden say, yes, go run my credit. It's much easier to say, hey, let's come up with a plan. Let's brainstorm. Let me teach you about these programs that you might be eligible for. And so that's how we kind of get our foot in the door with first-time home buyers and gain that trust so that, we can help them close down the line, whether that's next week or next year.
I mean, a few things you said that I think really stuck out to me that I think fits really well in this group is one is, make it pretty frictionless to get a little bit of information. So like, just that ability to do a soft credit pull and just get them a flavor of where they fit or if they fit or if they need to have large life changes in order for them to go achieve a home. Like that's I think fits really well with how millennials in this group go purchase things, is to just give me some information to help see if I'm in the range here. And then the second, I think, is the flexibility of how you support them in different ways, whether that's through digital only or through a phone call. There's phenomenal data that we did in Maxwell a long time ago, and maybe we can follow up with the attendees post webinar of, a lot of people think that millennials just want to perform digitally. And that's not the case. Like in the home buying transaction, millennials want that expert in their corner. And that's why I think so many of likely the people here today and the retail focused lenders in their communities are the best suited to winning this group over, because they can provide that expertise and that help in figuring out how to make this super complicated, super consequential decision, make them feel good about it. And so that ability to, hey, I'm likely going to be completely on my own. I'll, do all my documents digitally and I'll do my application digitally, but I still want to call you about this one question I have. And that flexibility in your process to do that, I think, is key in winning this group over. So be flexible in how you work with prospective borrowers and unique to what that person and how that person wants to interact with you, I think is a good theme for many as they kind of try to win this group over.
Yeah, Alan, I'm glad you mentioned that report. I was definitely going to reference that. As a technologist, sort of, my intention before I started working in the mortgage industry and building technology, well, it was always that, hey, if it looks like a nail, let's use a hammer. And everything to me, every problem, every challenge would look like a nail. So, let's layer in as much technology as possible. That's obviously not the case. Looking back at, like, you're talking about first-time home buyers, by the very nature of who they are, support and education is the number one area and place where lenders can actually make a difference and make an impact and help realize that that dream of homeownership. So the role of technology in this case should be to sort of support that education and learning for what someone is going through. Combining technology with sort of that human-led support is exactly what the more and more people, regardless of the age range too, seem to be looking for. One of the things when it comes to sort of that feature and what role technology can play, it's always what I found is both for the lenders and how they benefit from technology, as well as the borrowers and the people seeking the home. What benefits most is having the role of technology as a co-pilot, essentially some sort of an assistant that lets that person do the thing that they're looking to do, versus it being on autopilot and letting it run away with what it needs to do. So, or at Maxwell, we've also adapted sort of the role of technology to be that co-pilot in every instance we see. One example that comes to mind is in our point of sale, we have the ability to have a borrower be able to provide a letter of explanation, right? When that's requested by the lender, based on the transaction history or other things in the application, the lender asks the borrower to provide a letter of explanation. What we saw was that it was one of those areas where if you're a first-time home buyer, I definitely remember my experience that I didn't even know what a letter of explanation is, let alone how to write one, how to make it sound professional. And in the end, it's details like this, especially in a competitive market, that make a difference in your ability to achieve that home ownership dream. So what we noticed was that we were seeing a lot of these the task to write a letter of explanation was taking a long time. It was also one of those areas where it would constantly get sent back to the borrower to say, hey, can you add this? Can you make it more clear? Can you, actually include the address and a date and other things that would make it a formal letter? And so we, the role of technology, as I saw in solving that problem, was let's use generative AI and give borrowers an easy way to write a letter of explanation that looks right, that looks professional, and give them a way to edit it. And rather than it being the only way they can do it, it's also another tool that helps them get to that task or that type of ability faster. So continuing to see where we add more co-pilots, whether it's for the lender users or whether it's for the borrower users is where we see the role of technology continue to be an impact here.
One area I think, that the technology experience and the products that we've talked about, I think fit really well into once that person is starting to get into your quote unquote mousetrap, or once they've kind of made an introduction to you. One thing that I think is really key in this group, and I'll give a personal experience of this, is the value of content and education upfront, for that Evan also highlighted, but is, in my experience, I'm actually currently getting some term life insurance, and I'm specifically choosing the agency in the group that I'm going through because I found a blog article that was really specific to one of the things that we have in our family. And so that element and just becoming educational kind of won me over, as long as it's a decently competitive rate and it's a good fit from a product perspective. But I think that a lot of millennials really lean on this just absorbing of content and education. And that can come in through blogs. It can come in through LinkedIn if that's where you want to meet your people. It can come in local events, as Evan said, of, providing that education. So kind of indifferent of where the medium is, but just the importance of giving value to this group is really well respected. And really confident that, as you're doing it, it might feel like you're giving a lot for free. And some of your content might be so good that you feel like you could charge for it and you should charge for it. But at the end of the day, it will add value and those customers will come to you. If you're genuine and honest in the value and the education you're providing to a consumer trying to figure out a really hard and difficult purchase.
And people like options too.
Yeah.
So the whole content, like there's lots of times where we have all these first-time homebuyer programs and the client might have a big down payment, but they still want to hear about it and they still want to know why it does or doesn't make sense. So, if you're providing multiple different options, FHA versus conventional, and kind of telling them, hey, I did look at FHA for you, but it doesn't make sense because of XYZ. Like your payment's going to be lower because you have great credit and a good down payment. At least they know you looked at it and you kind of went over that option with them. So as a loan officer, I've always been big on teaching loan officers to provide the options, because if you're providing options with you, they're more likely to choose one of your options versus, hey, here's just this one regular conventional loan, and this other lender is talking about a first-time homebuyer program, FHA, and conventional. So that's big.
Yep.
I think that ties back into education.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen myself in sales. It's one, become the expert, and two, educate. And when you're educating, just fun fact, don't use acronyms. I can't tell you how many people use LOE or LOX for letter of explanation, and they have no idea what you're talking about. But I see that all the time, and it's just just meet them where they're at on their level, because no one outside our industry knows LOE. So.
And I do have an audience question that I think ties in really great to this segment. So AI. Is AI going to be a factor to consider in first-time home buyers?
I'll get started, and Alan and Evan, definitely please add your thoughts. We at Maxwell, or in general in my career, I've looked at technology as a tool to make the outcomes happen. So when building products, I look at technology, in this case AI, not as sort of the outcome. It's not to make a great product. It's to make the outcome that the user is looking for. So in this case, the first-time home buyer being able to afford and get the home that they're looking for. So when it comes to AI, going back to this idea of co-pilots, how can we enable the people, whether it's the lender or on the lender side, be more efficient, help bring costs down. At Maxwell, in our business intelligence product, we use AI to help to drive more insights from the data that the lender already has. So when it comes to market insights or just the insights from their operations, we use AI and power the insights that lenders are able to use to have more effective management of their own business. And that in turn drives lower costs for the borrower, a better experience for the borrower, that allows the lender on their end to be able to cater their marketing campaigns and other things to the audience that they're looking to win the business from. So the role of AI is in the outcome that the lender seeks. And when it comes to borrowers, the example I gave for letter of explanation is the type of a co-pilot feature that we want to keep adding into our software in our user experience, so that the first-time home buyer feels helped and supported and educated as they are pursuing these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think in short, AI is going to impact every single one of our transactions almost going forward. So not just this group, but I think it can be seen in every kind of stage as this person comes to home ownership. Like, they're going to, in search, now they're likely going to get an AI generated answer, a lot of times with Google as the main result, rather than go to an individual page. But Google is going to choose who that source of information is in the of that can be a great lead source for these home buyers for you coming to your website or starting an application. As Ratul said, there's really interesting things of how your technology partner can provide AI to help improve that borrower experience. Going back to what we said, where the millennial likely is really flexible in different opinions of what's the best way to solve something. AI is a great tool to help solve some questions that a first-time home buyer might have, but not all of them. And so it's finding that balance, not necessarily you doing that, but having a good technology partner do that, of what are questions that might come up through the application process or through the qualification process that AI can answer really quickly, and it doesn't have to go to Evan. But Evan can be there for the most important questions and provide that expertise. So, on a very flip side, let's think about some ways you could use AI to get to this group even more. We talked about content. Like, AI can help at least get some ideas of content going for you to start. If you're a limited resource or you're just starting to build this content or kind of educational component, AI can help you do that, can help you expand some of your marketing assets, help you from a website perspective. So a little bit of a rabbit hole, but AI, in general, is going to have a lot of roles in a lot of these elements, whether it's the buyer's experience or whether it's you trying to get to these buyers that can be a good fit.
I agree. I asked a borrower who I know used a big fintech lender. They had a lot of technology. Not going to name who they were. I was like, how was that process? Just because I was curious. And they said it was great. Their technology was cool, but you could tell behind the scenes there was a person that did not know what they were talking about. So that's where I'm a huge fan of her tools like Copilot. Like, we should be using AI to enhance what we're doing. It doesn't replace us. So making our jobs more efficient, making content more efficient, reviewing documentation, generating documentation, like the list is endless. But I definitely, it's definitely human touch plus AI, not just AI.
I like that. I was listening to a podcast that Clayton Collins, our CEO, was hosting yesterday, and he was saying that good AI should make people who are good at their job better. And you should look at it that way, as an enhancement, not a replacement. So it should give you runway to run, which I thought was a really interesting perspective, because I think sometimes people look at it as a scary sort of replacement. So as we get close to the top of the hour, I would like to ask each of you in a sentence or two, what is your number one piece of advice for lenders looking to win business of first-time home buyers in today's market? Who would like to go?
I'll get started. I'll be simple. Become educated, educate, and just meet people where they're at, wherever they're at.
I'll go next. I'll say rethink your role in the sense of, and this probably goes against the rules because I shouldn't have to have an explanation of my sentence if it's a good sentence. But in just that whole realtor loan officer relationship that is so heavily generated by the real estate agent, and where the kind of all the power lies today, rethink that and figure out, if I was going to go be the gatekeeper and I was going to have first time home buyers come to me first, how would you do that, and how would you meet that audience where they are, as Evan said so well?
I'll sort of tag on to both of those ideas, but essentially, rethink the role as advisor, right? And lean on technology and other things that you get, from the partners that you work with, to give you the tools to support, educate, and enhance your role as an advisor and educator.
All right. Well, thank you all for sharing all of the insight about first-time homebuyers in today's market and how to connect with them, and the role of technology. For our audience, if you're interested in more information from the report that we mentioned in today's webinar, you can see a link to download the PDF in the resources tab at the bottom of your screen. With that, I am going to jump into audience questions. To our audience, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panel, we're going to start with those now. You can still submit questions at any time by using that Q&A icon that you see at the bottom of your screen. Now, our first question. Evan, as a lender, what's the most common reason you see first-time homebuyers abandoning the mortgage process, and how do you combat that?
I would say, unfortunately, the number one thing lately is affordability or payment shock. So you have, we used to talk to people that were renting I mean, this is when I first started a decade ago, but we're renting an apartment and you could buy a house for a similar payment, and then it went to, hey, you're renting a house and then you can buy a house for a similar payment. And unfortunately, and it depends on the market, obviously, but unfortunately with a low down payment in most markets, your mortgage is going to be higher than your rent. So I think you combat that with education. And there's tools out there that you can look at buy versus rent analysis and kind of see, hey, how long do you plan on being here? I kind of stay away that, yes, if we can refinance, which at some point we will, but I try to stay away from like, yes, you'll be able to refinance by this point because that's what got people in trouble in the crash. But hey, how long do you think you'll be here? And the benefit of home ownership is your payment's fixed. Like you have that stability. You don't have to move. You can do whatever you want to the property if the HOA allows it, of course. I'm going through that right now. So it's fresh on my mind. But you have that flexibility. You're in the home. Your payment can only go up because of taxes and insurance versus rent is that kind of variable. So I think the biggest hurdle is affordability. We do talk about temporary buy downs a lot as an option. I'm not saying we use it all the time, but hey, for people to start getting comfortable with those payments so they can inch their way up. Again, providing that option always is an option. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but that option versus a regular loan, someone might actually say, you know what, I can do that. I can go from a 24 to 27 to $3,000 payment. Like we can see that because we're expecting to get raises, or maybe two people are buying and one person's going to be finishing school and they know income is going to be up in a couple of years. So I would say figuring out ways to have the conversation of my payment's going up. Like you can't really sell on payment anymore. It has to be like, what is the long-term goal? Like a true financial advisor. Like if someone might be here only for a year, I don't always like, it usually doesn't make sense to buy because you're really just planning on the market at that point. So there are times where we say it doesn't make sense.
So the next question that I have is, how do you see the first-time home buyer share trending as the market continues to recover?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. I think ultimately, as rates improve and the kind of golden handcuffs become less prevalent on some home buyers with really low rates, I think percentage wise, it probably likely will become a smaller percentage of the overall market. However, I think the trajectory of the number of those individual buyers in the market and those number of transactions will continue to increase. This is still one of the largest or the largest generations, the millennials in the United States. I think it's something like 70 million millennials. So like this group isn't going anywhere, and there's this unfed demand of needing to get into a home. So I think it might be a little bit more geographic of where's there more incentive for new construction of better kind of first time homes in areas, and I think it'll be a little bit more nuanced on the geographical areas of where it's the most prevalent and where it's more prevalent than others. But I think the total number of first time home buyers kind of year over year will continue to increase for the kind of mid to long term future.
I think something that I referenced this article in Bankrate talking about sort of some of the interviews with that folk in that with that group in the first time home buyers that is in that 30-something early late 20 range, the millennials. And I think the thing that I took away from it from those interviews was this idea that they definitely are defying sort of the traditional norms around marriage and what stage in their life they do that and what decisions they make before marriage. In this case, being a homeowner, it's still driven by the fact that they believe homeownership to be one of the key foundations for the American dream and creating generational wealth. And so, they start early, or they start at an age where they might not be ready for marriage, but they're ready for home ownership. So that trend should continue aligning with this idea of being, considering home ownership as a critical part of their life. So that doesn't seem to be changing. We've been seeing that ever since we've been looking at data, and ever since I've been understanding the segments in this group.
And the next question that I have for y'all is, from a marketing perspective, what can lenders do to optimize the lifetime value of first-time home buyers as customers?
Okay, I'll hop in there. I would say kind of the stuff that we've already talked about. So if you have a client, don't just view them as a transaction. One, have a way to keep track of future refinances, whether that's 6 months from now or 36 months from now. You need to be ready when rates drop and educate them, and that's something like, I know some people have mortgage checkups. So once a year, they'll always touch base and just say, hey, just so you know, rates are higher than where you're at, or it doesn't make sense to refinance. I think that's a good touch point. And then also finding ways to tap into their database. So I know people that do the housewarming party, which maybe you spend $100 or $200, or you bring drinks or whatever to their house and you help sponsor their housewarming party. And now you get to meet all their friends. You can go to their employers, and if you think that they'd be willing to do a lunch and learn, or even if someone has a benefit meeting, like I know a loan officer at our company, there's a benefit meeting for a school district. So once a year, all their benefits people come in, and he'll sit there and he'll have a booth and just talk about home ownership for anyone that's interested. So kind of tapping into ways of, hey, who is your borrower as a person, and how do you think you can, not just tap into their network, but really the way I think about it is help people like them, so help people in their sphere. And then something, I know it's like, there's a lot of coaching programs out there that are like, ask for the referral. Like, I hate asking for referrals, but what I don't mind when we go through that initial analysis and initial plan, when we do the soft credit check of, hey, do you know anyone else that would benefit from this? So just knowing that, keeping in touch, and then seeing if you could work their sphere. Because one client, I hope they're not one transaction, because you're probably not doing it right. And if you are, just, figure out what you need to do from a customer service level and operations. But that one customer can easily turn into 10, over the next 5 years. So.
Yeah, I think one thing I like to do in these scenarios is just think about yourself as a consumer. Like, think about the companies that you've made multiple purchases with, whether that's a bank or whether that's a clothing company, and you as a consumer, what built that trust? What created that your desire to do 2 transactions? How did you get educated on a potential second transaction? How did you get educated or desire to refer someone? And so it's a little bit, thematic of the experience you have, but like, we're all consumers in every one of, in our lives every single day. And so think about the times that you really trusted a company and what led you to doing those actions, and having multiple purchases can give you some ideas of where you maybe are missing in your business. Maybe you don't have the data or the kind of thoughtfulness of email lists on your client base of people who could be good fit based on the rate. So, just start thinking about where there may be gaps in your business today that you can start to plug in based on what's worked for you as a consumer.
And the next question that I have is an interesting one. So, are there specific areas of the US that Maxwell data shows the first-time homebuyer segment flocking to?
I can take a look at, or I can get started, and I would love thoughts from Evan and Alan as well. But we've seen from again, looking at our data from our data infrastructure, states with the highest rates of first-time home buyers. We've seen the highest in areas like Illinois, Kentucky, West Virginia, in sort of that 47 to 58% range. Those are the top 3, and then followed very closely, not too far behind, by Iowa and Massachusetts. And then states with the lowest rates of first-time home buyers was probably the one I would have not guessed or found it more surprising, were states like Mississippi, Montana, Utah, Arizona, and Hawaii, in that sort of the 19% range. Love thoughts from Alan and Evan on what you're seeing that would sort of be driving those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, first reaction, I think, except for a few of the outliers, like maybe Mississippi, is, generally probably cost of living is probably one of the biggest elements there. The group that's doing really well, aren't densely urban populated areas for the most part, except for Chicago and Illinois. But maybe that's the biggest trend. And so, outside of states, that could extrapolate to kind of what we mentioned earlier of this group being more flexible to not living in the prime areas of a metropolitan area or the most expensive areas, but being more open to a little bit more of the suburb life or a little bit outside of town that can meet their kind of personal finance needs of what a mortgage payment needs to be and still reach home ownership. Evan, interested in your opinion. Your state's one of the lowest there. So
I know my state's one of the lowest. I think it could be a little misleading because it's there's still quite a few investors that still invest in Arizona just because of cheap property taxes. So you do see, and like you even see build to rent where it's crazy that you see those communities that they literally build single families to rent. So I think you see quite a few investors, and then you also see quite a few second home vacation home. But other than that, I do think affordability is one of the number ones that you've seen people that like, either they would have to live an hour outside of Phoenix, or hey, maybe their family's from a different part of the US that they can live 15 minutes from where they grew up and, buy something that's a little more affordable. I definitely think Kentucky, Virginia, Iowa, I'm not an expert in those markets, but those are likely more affordable with less, second home vacations. I mean, Hawaii seems very expensive. So that definitely makes sense.
Right. Well, we are just about at the top of the hour, so I want to give you all the opportunity for any final thoughts before we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Evan, do you have something?
Yeah, I saw an anonymous attendee question here about, they were asking, where do you feel most new home buyers are going for their information, which seems to be fact when it's really misinformation. It's one of my pet peeves. I get questions all the time about like house hacking or, hey, I heard you could do this or do that. And I see them, and I would love to have like a TikTok or Instagram, like basically put everything together and then, basically show them where they're not accurate. And it's unfortunate because like 80% of the material is usually accurate. And then one of the little things that they're doing is illegal. So so I think the big thing on that is education of being like, oh, I saw that too. Like, again, education, home equity agreements, those are becoming popular. And people are like, pull cash out of your house with no payment. Well, they're not telling you the negative, of what an HEA is, home equity agreement. So if you don't know as a loan officer, Google it, because you will get that question because it is trending. So I think, go on TikTok, go on Instagram yourself, start following a bunch of housing stuff, even not necessarily loan officers, and you'll kind of see the content that they see and be like, it'll annoy you, it'll frustrate you, but kind of acknowledge that it's out there, and then that way you can combat it, properly. So yeah, I feel
love that idea, Evan. I would
point.
watch your takedown of the misinformation on TikTok.
Yeah, I should do that. I should do that.
Yeah, highly entertaining.
TikTok we've had a couple articles at HousingWire that have been a response to TikTok videos that have gone viral that are incorrect.
There you go.
I definitely agree with that there. Unfortunately, we are at the top of our hour and are out of time. Webinar time seems to go by faster than normal time, but I want to thank you for joining us today, Evan, Ratul, Alan. So much insight in 60 minutes. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. HousingWire will be sending out the recording of today's webinar with the deck that we showed next week, and you will be able to see the video of today's presentation at housingwire.com. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Hopefully we'll see you all again soon.